how in HR do we give them tools that are useful and that they don't feel are just another thing that gets in their way. So as Harry says, getting people engaged at the right time is a key part, I think.
Thanks. And look, I think that's what we'll discuss is I think HR and learning people love capability frameworks because it's an organization's love, but I'm not sure the users find too much use. But we'll discuss that. But Miles, over to you just for a quick comment on the statistic.
Yeah, sure. And I'd say frameworks in general, it's dependent on your leadership. It's dependent on what your objective is, and really around the discipline of the group that's going to be utilising them. So sticking to or honouring the process is very important if you want to see effective results, and that might be whilst we only see that 5% result.
Thanks, Miles. So, just moving to the problem statement and some statistics to support that. So the question asked was, what was the biggest challenge faced while implementing capability frameworks? So Harry hopefully will, get some answers from here. 38% said too complex to be used in a practical manner. That's a big chunk. And maybe that's our love of making things really sophisticated. 28% say that take a long time to be developed, which was kind of links to the topic, is that by the time you develop has the organization and the workforce moved on. 16% said that not integrated into recruitment, performance management, all the other HR functions. And I've got my own view on that. This is kind of a big issue because I've looked around the technology platforms which nicely and sophisticated, integrate with different parts of HR in a sophisticated manner. I haven't found too much, to be honest, so it'll be kind of interesting to hear that. 11% developed in isolation, so this kind of saying it probably needs to be more collaborative with the business and also the end user. And 7%, and that luckily that's low, say that do not add value to the business. So again, to the panel, probably Harry, to you on this one. Too complex to be used in a practical manner?
Well, yes, look, it's interesting, and it's the sort of thing that I guess I'll be talking about in a minute, because there can be a real tendency to try and crowd everything into the capability framework, and it's a very well-intentioned thing to do, but it ends up then being quite user-unfriendly. So well, there's some things here across all these statistics about the build phase and also the implementation phase as well.
Sure. Andrea, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I'll talk about in my presentation about how we are trying to make it simpler so that it's easier for a manager to pick up and use with their staff. So yes, I have seen some very complex, and I'm very pleased to be seeing that things are moving to a simpler process.
Sure. Moving on to the next statistics, which is 91% feel that assessing, not access, but assessing, that's a typo there, assessing employee capabilities is kind of done through a mix of peer evaluation and manager evaluation. There's a 6%, which I'm a little surprised the number is so low. Which was nobody has time for assessing capabilities because life is so busy. I thought that number might be higher. But Miles, what's your view on the assessing of capabilities through a mix?
It's complicated.
And it takes time.
Yeah. How much time do I have?
Yeah.
It can be very difficult because you think about the capability, particularly in the organisation like Bupa. We've got people that are frontline, we've got people that are contact centre, we've got people that work back office and in contact centre. So assessing capability across the board, getting that baseline can actually take a lot of time. But if you get it right and you know who your users are, then it makes it much easier to identify what the discrepancies are and what we need to develop there.
Thank you, Miles. And I guess this is the one that I'm hoping that we can have a discussion, but also get some inputs from the audience. Can we reduce the time and complexity of developing capability frameworks, but also how can we make it more intuitive and use a little bit more so that it can be used? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just run through a few slides about capability frameworks itself. I mean, I've been looking into what people mean by capability frameworks, and this definition is from Deloitte, which says it has competencies, insights, technology, talent. There's quite a few things in there. the question we asked from Learning Cafe is what makes up capability, and 82% said that capability comprises of skills or competencies, knowledge, processes, systems, and culture. So it's a pretty big definition of what capability means to 82%. Harry, what's your view on this definition of capability? I guess which is the kind of the Capability Cafe definition.
Look, it's an interesting and comprehensive definition.
It's almost too big, isn't it?
How all those things then manifest within the one capability is an interesting one, and how you might be able to separate out some of those key things so that you're making the capability framework pragmatic, and at the same time you're going for additional detail when and if you need to.
Right. Yep. No, that's cool. The next question that we asked was, what are the key skills for capability professional? This one, maybe it's not surprising. 49% said business acumen, i.e. knowing your business really well, so that I guess you can understand what capabilities are required and therefore can contribute more. 10% said business analysis, 18% said learning design and development, and 11% said change management. So Miles, over to you for your comment on this 49% for business acumen.
Well, I mean, it's all about the right people, having the right people in the room. So ensuring that when you are looking at assessing capability and developing new frameworks, then it's very important.
Cool.
I don't really have much else to say.
No worries. Andrea, any views on this?
Yeah, well, if you don't know your customer, how can you then, you need to know your customer to assist them. So that key skill of being a business partner, getting in and understanding what the leader's vision is,
yep,
so that you can then turn something into a practical tool that enables the business to move forward, whether it's a not-for-profit or profit, is important.
Sure. Okay. No, thank you for that. Okay. So just moving on, there's actually a framework that I do want to talk about, which is the CMM people framework, which I actually found very useful and probably closer to what Capability Cafe thinks what capability includes. And there's an extensive body of information on this framework, and it's been used in different organizations. And as you can see that, as from level 1 to level 5. Level 5 is like you're very mature. Level 2 is not that mature, but you can see that it goes from training and development, communication, coordination, compensation, being kind of separate into a more integrated view where you've got competency integrations between the different parts of the business. There's also managing capability of the organization. So I think I'm currently involved in some work with one of the leading banks in Australia about the future capabilities, and it's quite interesting to look at the future capabilities that that organization requires and how do we make it up. So is it just people getting skilled on those capabilities, or do we actually need to create a culture and provide the tools for them to practice that? So it's interesting. But look, this is an interesting model. If we'll send a link soon for this. But do have a look at that. Now I'm going to hand over to Andrea for her slide. So Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, Jeevan, and thank you for people dialing in across the world. If you want to move to the next slide, Jeevan. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of the Queensland public sector. So we have 20 departments and 15 other public service offices. So that's things like the Anti-Discrimination Commission and ombudsmans and those type of places that most people would understand as the public service. And we employ a lot of people, as you can see, 249,000 plus employees across Queensland, from the tip of Cape York and out to the islands and out to Longreach, etc. And so that includes teachers, police, nurses. So it's quite a complex and interesting workforce that we're trying to support in the Public Service Commission. So at the family barbecue, people ask, what is the Public Service Commission? And I'll say it's the HR of the HRs. So we provide a an overview, and so we have a legislative requirement in some parts, and then in other parts, like where I am in performance and capability development, it's providing policy to direction. So next slide, Jeevan. So that thing about what is capability, I think we've tried to capture that in our leadership talent management strategy. So what we're trying to do here is encapsulate that that leadership development is creating a pipeline so that of good people coming through, so that we can provide good services to the people and communities of Queensland. So it's quite big and broad, and we do try to make some measures around that. So I've put a web link in and you can go in and see the strategy itself. But our capability framework, which we call the Workforce Capability Success Profile, is an underpinning part of our leadership talent management strategy in terms of being able to measure and assess and put people forward for development opportunities, but also for making sure that individuals are taking responsibility for themselves in their own development. So so our capability framework is an underpinning part of our whole focus on talent management across the sector.
Andrea, can I just interrupt to ask a question while we're going there? You know that the bit around lifelong learning, right? And I guess you know, we kind of want people to be self-starters and self-learning, that they can keep learning on their own. And when they're, I guess, responsible for their own learning, they will go to the capability framework and use it and all the learning that's attached to that. Yes. Do you see the attitude towards lifelong learning changing in employees, or not in the past, I don't know, 4 to 5 years?
What's the good HR response? It depends. It's certainly, we have the whole bell curve in the public sector, like in any organisation. Some people are really motivated to develop themselves, and others are come to work to support a lifestyle outside of work. So I'm privileged working with the leadership component of the public sector, which is the top 1,000 in the hierarchy, and I see a consistent a consistent positive force in moving forward and developing themselves. Yes. Yeah. So our workforce capability success profile, affectionately known as the success profile, is like any other capability framework that I've come across in my career. It's about providing a common language so that people can speak to each other in terms of being able to move and develop. And one of the things that in terms of our assessment process is that one of the key things that's coming out is that managers that are successful in the public sector have more than a hierarchical career. So they don't come in as a trainee and end up as the Director General, which is our term for the Chief Executive Officer. People that maybe come in and then go out and work in the not-for-profit or move between agencies are showing that they're the ones that are achieving in this environment, and that goes back to that lifelong learning as well, in terms of moving people through and across the sector is an important part of ensuring that we're getting people that are knowledgeable about the whole sector. I'm you know, in the big bureaucracies that I'm sure Harry and Miles can also talk about big bureaucracies. You get silos created. So people that can move across those silos are able to, because we've got a common framework across. And if you go to the next slide, Jeevan. So this is probably small, but I've put the link in to the previous slide. What we've gone away from, so in the success profile, what I really like is the little people across the bottom, because that just gives a complete picture of where we're at in terms of moving away from a hierarchical, very detailed competency framework where, you know, previous profiles had, and we've got an administrative officer level 1, level 2, level 3, and those were detailed for each level, where this is more what's your role in the organisation. So are you an individual contributor? Are you a team leader? Are you a program manager, which is do you manage teams, or are you an executive? So do you manage program managers? So that makes it more accessible for that mobility across the state, because somebody in an AO5 position in town may just be an individual contributor, but if you're an AO5 out in Longreach, you're more than likely running a large team. So it didn't make sense. So this way of going, okay, are you an individual contributor, are you a team leader, are you a program manager, are you an executive, make sure that we're focusing on the role, not the job classification. So this is a level of simplicity that I'm really enjoying about this profile. And then if you go down to the accountability, point number 10 across the roles is, it's not, maybe not number 10, where it's one of those down in there, sorry Jeevan, is about your own professional and professional categories. So we have some really strong professional competency frameworks out that are being used as well, which link into industry. So, for example, the information technology or the procurement people, they have competency frameworks that talk about their technical skills. And so this is about the behaviours in the workplace, whereas and what we're wanting to achieve to create good communities for Queenslanders and moving forward is there's other, we're not saying there's an only answer, we're saying this works in conjunction with other things that exist outside in the sector. So next slide. Thanks, Jeevan. So, and as 240,000 plus people, there are some challenges. So each department can choose their own framework, and as I said before, we've had previous competency frameworks and some departments are still using those. So we at that top 1,000, they're all using the success profile, but depending on it, the HR group in the department, they can choose to opt into the success profile or not. So that's a challenge from a big picture perspective, because it dilutes our employee value proposition, because a person can apply for a job in one place and they have to go through one particular use of a competency framework, whereas in you go to another and the success profile is there. So it's an interesting journey that we're, as a central agency, where we don't say thou shalt. It's an interesting journey that we're on. And the other challenge is around our Working for Queensland, so which is our employee opinion survey, which goes out across all departments, that if people are looking to leave, it's because they're not getting the learning and development that they're after. And while 56% positive response to performance assessment is great, but that means 40+% aren't happy with the performance assessment that they're getting. So the challenges of working in a complex environment are certainly there. So the success profile doesn't answer all the questions. It is about moving forward. So we use our success profile in our executive performance agreements, as I've said, and each agency has to use a framework for recruitment, selection and learning and development. But one of the exciting things that's coming out from the data that we're using our success profile is that we can track our high-performing, high potentials and give people out there in the sector some tips on and tricks on how to progress their career. So for example, if you want to go from a program manager to an executive, that mobility thing that I spoke about before is an important aspect. You're more likely to move from program manager to executive if you've got high levels of mobility on your CV. So that's, and for those that are interested, again, I've given you the link there to go and have a look at our roadmap, which is a one-pager, which is pretty fantastic. My colleagues have put that together. So that's it for me. Thank you, Jeevan.
Thank you, Andrea, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I've got a few questions on the presentation, but we'll keep it because we're going to move to Miles. Miles, over to you.
Thank you, Jeevan. And if we just skip across to the next slide. Full disclosure, my background is not learning and development, so I actually come from the other side of the fence, being the sales and marketing side, so working very closely with people in learning development and working closely with HR and working closely with our training teams to ensure that in my previous roles, some of the things that we wanted to do, whether it be introducing things like lean to a service organisation, or even introducing a new CRM platform in an organisation that had a lot of dependency on legacy systems, was going to be successful both for our people on the front line, but also right through our customer service, ops and back office support teams. So I came across to Bupa at the start of this year, and quite simply the challenges that we have as an organisation, and to Andrea's point, it's about scale. The organisation I came from before, coming across to Bupa, similar problems, similar challenges, but the story so far at Bupa is that we've got a multi-year transformation strategy, both on the customer side and then also at a market unit level in the functional side. So things as simple as having a single view of our people, together with some common IS services, as well as then developing a new CRM, having the cloud capability to support this new CRM, having all our existing provider and eligibility and entitlement components plugging into this CRM, so that the focus or the benefit is going to be for our users who are interacting with customers to have a much valuable conversation. And what I'll talk today specifically is the value conversation framework. So if we move on to the next slide, what's really interesting for us as an organisation is that the environment that we're currently in, would have seen Medibank, and you've got NIB and HCF and ourselves, health insurance uptake in terms of growth is slowing, and what we're starting to find out more and more is that people don't switch health insurance providers because of price, it's because of other elements of the service interaction that they want to get more value from. So for us, we're saying if we're going to be Bupa Health Insurance, then we should be able to provide more value to our members. And most of that value is around understanding what your policy is, and then how do I get the most benefit from that policy. I mean, probably, what, 90%, 95% of people on this call, so out of the 48 we've got registered, probably 45 would have, I'd say at a guess, some basic health cover. The other 3 are probably thinking, yeah, you know, don't worry about it, it's fine. But all of us have access to a product which generally we don't use, so how do I get more value from that? The considerations for us are not just from a customer perspective, but our people, how our people interact with our customers at the moment is very much transactional. You come in, you've got a problem that you need to fix, I fix it for you, you move on your way. In terms of the technology that we've got legacy systems, and we've got multiple systems that we utilise to provide a customer service. And of course, culturally, depending on where you work within the organisation, we've got retail, which is 90-odd locations around the country. We've got state offices, and you know, even from one location to another, there's a slightly different culture or subculture in South Australia than there is to New South Wales or Queensland. And for us, what's really important is that our leadership, whether we be happy, sad, or otherwise regarding these various change initiatives, we need to make sure that our messaging is consistent, and the way that we position the level of change that we're going to go through or are currently going through is going to be one that is, you know, you want to be looking at it from a positive frame. So moving on to the next slide, Jeevan. So what we're talking to today is about providing greater value to our customer and ensuring that we develop a framework that is centred on providing value to our customers through our people, so how they interact with our customers, the CRM, the software, and the technology. The environment, I'll say, is, you know, it underpins all of that, so it could be either sitting behind a desk over the phone, it could be web, or it could be face-to-face. But typically our people are going to be the ones that are going to be interacting with our customers. Next slide. So to add a little bit more context, the sales and growth area in which I work in represents retail growth channels and support functions, and our director's quite forward thinking. So rather than say, well, you know, let's create really complex frameworks that are going to take too long, let's just leverage and use frameworks that are out there that we can use to develop and embed what we want to do through the value conversation. One of my colleagues, Julie Fidel, has established an environment called Retail X, and what they use in that space is the lean innovation model. And can people put their hands up if they've heard about this model before? I mean, happy to try it. But effectively what it is, the cycle is about coming up with ideas which we then build, measure, assess the data that's been captured, and then learn from that to keep iterating. So it really helps us in terms of testing and proving or disproving some of the assumptions that we have about how we interact with our customers and what they would consider to be valuable. So we consider value a conversion in terms of getting a sale. A customer might say, well, that's your value. The value for me is, okay, I've bought this product. Now what am I going to get from it? So what are some of the things that we need to do as an organisation to be able to say to our customer, this is your product, here's how you can use it, and this is how much value you're going to receive from that. So that's really the visual or the tangible element. For us as an organisation, we need to continue delivering value on the back end. So communications that go out to you, the way that you utilise your Blue Book card, the way that we process your claims, the way that we then provide an update to you whether or not that claim has been processed in full or in part, and helping you understand that yes, that's still the part of the cycle for me as an end user, and that's where I'm going to get value.
So Miles, can I just
so that really is about,
can I just interrupt to ask a question? So so essentially what you're saying here is that, you know, the capabilities required from, you know, the sales and growth business area have been defined using the customer experience as a starting point, or the customer value generation?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. But is there, so is that pretty comprehensive? That is, do you only focus on what customers requires, or you kind of focus on what customers requires plus there's also other stuff like, you know, maybe innovation, for example, right? So while it is not...
Sure, I mean, that's why we use the lean innovation loop as opposed to going off and creating an overly complex framework that may or may not be recognised. So for us, when I looked at that slide earlier around, some of the challenges with capability frameworks are it's complex, it takes too long, it's not integrated, it's not collaborative, and I don't see the value add. The Lean Innovation Loop allows us to do that in a rapid testing environment. So we can actually get some of these results really, really quickly by taking people into the lab, testing it, measuring it, getting the result, and then iterating on top of that.
Thanks, Miles.
No worries. So that's one part. That's around creating developing the value conversation framework, and we're going through that process now. We'll be kicking that off in early in the new year, and we've used that previously to develop a value conversation a tool, which has been useful in helping our people understand, hey, we assume that customers didn't want this. This is actually a really good opportunity for us to extend on that learning and see how far we can take this in terms of the value conversation. And part of the research we're doing now, when we look at our existing conversation frameworks for customer interactions, what's the correlation between having that conversation in accordance with this framework, and what's the benefit to us and to the customer? Is there a correlation between using this framework and benefiting the customer? So, that's the value add component we had earlier that came up in the slide. That for us is really important. So doing that research and making sure that as a baseline we've got some data to say, here's what we can initially test, and here's what we're going to be going through in terms of the cycle. In terms of embedding, sorry, if we just go back to the slide before, the positive psychology component, this is a really simple framework that our director had used previously in the banking and finance sector, and that was really just around coaching to three core components, which is recognizing that someone's doing something good, rewarding them for it, and then socializing that, and trying to use that framework on an ongoing basis to ensure that anything that's negative is effectively dismissed, and what we would see is more and more positive interactions being reinforced for our people and for our coaches whilst delivering a customer experience. Any questions on that one?
All good, Miles, at the moment.
Okay, moving on. So some of the risks are, it is complicated, and I think to Andrea's point earlier, it depends on who the users are going to be. In a contact center environment, it's much easier to monitor and coach to these interactions because we typically record those interactions, there's notes in systems. The compliance component is much more rigorous. Out in retail, we've got a decentralized workforce, right? So you think about having 90 locations around the country, it's going to be difficult to monitor those interactions. So it really is going to be how we leverage the coaches that are using this embedding framework in positive psychology and the feedback they provide. So some of the things we're doing there is having a coaching platform, which we call Phoenix, having those results socialized on a regular basis. So what are your uptake rates? Who's using it the most? Who's not using it very much? And being able to share that with your broader cohort to ensure that there's some consistency in terms of usage. Our legacy systems are really good, but they're really complicated, and to develop enhancements in that system have been challenging to date. We've also got people that have capability that's wedded to these legacy systems. So for us, we need to be really mindful that developing capability for users in this new world, in a new CRM environment, utilizing different tools and developing new skills is going to be a challenge, as well as our appetite for change at a broader level. So that's where leadership's really important, and ensuring that our leaders are going out with the message that this is going to add value to our customers. Now, I read an article, I think last night, around Nokia in the acquisition, Microsoft's acquisition of Nokia, and they did nothing wrong. The only thing, what they did was they didn't move fast enough, and that's something that we're constantly talking about. Just because we're the largest provider or one of the largest providers in the country doesn't mean you can just sit on your hands and do nothing. We have to keep evolving, we have to keep moving. And as I pointed out earlier, the decentralized workforce is definitely one of the challenges we have, and how we engage that user group in having the capability that we want to see consistently applied across the various channels that we have. In terms of measures, I'll go to the last slide. our success is going to be measured through our engagement scores. So at a macro level, how are our teams coping with the level of change that we're introducing, and are we developing the capabilities or the competencies in an effective manner? For our customers, we'll see that through their NPS scores, and in previous projects what we've seen at Bupa, small changes can have a big impact, and similarly with at a more micro level, the hypothesis testing that we're going to be doing through the lean innovation cycle, as well as the embedding rates with the coaching through positive psychology, that's going to tell us whether or not we're achieving the desired results, or whether or not we need to go back and iterate, which is most likely going to be the case. That's it for me, I think. Jabin? Over to you, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and really interesting, take on developing capability frameworks. Harry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeevan. So just by way of background, I've been involved in developing and implementing capability frameworks for over 20 years. The last 12 plus have been at DDI. DDI is Development Dimensions International, so we use the term dimensions, capabilities, competencies, a bit interchangeably. That might be a bit sacrilegious, but that's the way that we operate. And certainly I've seen some change happen in the way that we look at developing capability frameworks. In the olden days gone by, there used to be 8,000 strategic interviews and 4,000 focus groups, and behaviour-oriented rating scales for each capability, and rating and ranking and C-scores, all sorts of things that are focused on getting rigor into the framework. But unfortunately what happens with you can get carried away with the rigor and it becomes an impractical thing to use. So the scope of change, the scope of innovation, the scope of disruption requires us as practitioners to look at operating differently around how we develop, how we implement, how we embed capability frameworks. When I was talking to my colleagues about the sort of key challenges that we see, we looked at distilling it down to these three, and I'd like to address each of these ones in a little bit of detail and put forward hopefully not what is seen as simplistic solutions, but because there's complexity in everything that we're talking about here. But it's how can you look at making sure that you're doing, if you're developing something from scratch, if you like, how you can look at ensuring that it's got the best chance of being a business enabler as opposed to something that just sits there and does nothing. When we were looking at it then, so at that first one, no link, weak link is more a perceptual thing than anything else, because I think everybody who's involved in developing capability frameworks always wants to make the link back to the business. But how much have we really leveraged that in an overt, direct way so that we can actually use it to engage the right people right from the beginning in what that capability framework is? Because my suspicion around the use of them or the effectiveness of them is the take-up rate, is whether it makes sense to the people who are the end users and whether they see it as enabling them in their performance or not. And that typically sort of starts right from the beginning. Boiling the ocean, there's a real temptation to look at cramming everything into a capability framework so that it's as comprehensive as anything, but then becomes just inoperable as far as a practical solution goes. And reinventing the wheel, it's very heartening to hear that my colleagues are not doing that. So because there's so much around now, there's so much around to leverage. Yes, organisations are unique, and yes, there's going to be a unique take on it, but it's more the uniqueness around the implementation rather than we're so unique we have to start with a blank sheet of paper. So there's that balance between getting the rigour around things versus the pragmatic application. We can learn a lot and apply a lot from those sorts of agile principles.
Harry, can I just ask a question? Because all organizations like to think that they are unique, and I guess in my own experience has been that that thought may not be entirely accurate. But when an organization claims it is unique and it is unique, what really kind of determines the uniqueness? I'm kind of assuming it's maybe a product that nobody else sells or a process that nobody else does, so therefore it is therefore it is different. But if it is, accounts receivable, it's pretty similar everywhere. Or if it is, sales, could be fairly similar. So what are your views on why this impression that every business is unique? Or is a uniqueness in the combination of how the different things work?
Again, so every organisation is unique in terms of its business landscape, its business strategy, its culture, and how all those particular elements impact on what is required of people within the organisation. So that's the uniqueness, but at the same time there's going to be some common core threads across all that that are the indicators of what key behaviours are going to lead to success. So the challenge for frameworks is to reflect that business landscape, reflect the business priorities, reflect the culture, so that all users can point to it and can understand how their uniqueness is reflected in that. But it doesn't mean that you have to take 50 years to finesse down to the finest word what the content of that capability framework is. That's where that's the trap, I think, for us to go down the track of. I think I'm seeing it happen less, but there's still that sort of tendency to go, we're unique, therefore how can we leverage what's there already?
And Harry, just another question, sorry, keep interrupting, but just in terms of you kind of said the business priorities, right? So capability frameworks and pretty much everything that we do in organization should be kind of aligned to business priorities. Is it a case that when we do capability frameworks, we try to address too many of the business priorities, and instead of doing that, just kind of focus on the top 5 key priorities and address them, and that might have more chance of a success than trying to address 30 priorities?
Well, yeah, thank you, Stephen, because that goes straight into the next slide. Okay, so in terms of I just want to touch on who's championing its implementation and sustainability. Okay, it's a wonderful thing to build it, and if we build it, they will come, but they won't come unless you've actually established some things around that implementation so that people are engaged with it. But just picking up on your point there, if I can go to the next slide. So we had to look at our own practice around this in terms of how complex we were making it for our clients, and we reevaluated and adjusted our methodology for doing this probably 10 years ago and continue to finesse it since then. And it relates very specifically, Jeevan, to what you were talking about in terms of the business priorities. We ran the risk, because we're so capability focused and because we're so passionate about our capabilities and how effective they are, when you're talking to and getting engagement from senior leaders, from strategic leaders, their eyes are going to roll back in their head and they're going to lose the will to live if you keep talking about capabilities and not make direct links to the business. And we saw that we were running the risk of that when we were talking to organisations and executives about building capability frameworks, because the bubble over their head wasn't, I wonder how good we are at delegation, I wonder how good we are at building organisational talent. Yep. The bubble over their head was, we've just acquired 2 organisations in the last 18 months. We now have restructured the whole organisation to really capitalise on those acquisitions. Now we've got the structure. We need people who can integrate that new organisational structure at this level of leadership. Who are they? What do they need to be good at? How can we look at developing that? How can we look at getting leaders ready to do that now? And so we changed our methodology on its head, basically, where we didn't even mention the capability word. We went to what those business drivers were. And instead of, like I think you're indicating, Chief, instead of looking to boil the ocean across all the strategic capabilities, what are the 4 maybe priority business drivers that, based on your business landscape, are going to impact on this level of leadership versus that level of leadership versus this level within the organisation or this subject matter expert? And it fundamentally changed the game around the way in which we looked at developing capability frameworks, and you can use that methodology. If I can ask you to go to the next slide, please, Jeevan, to build frameworks that are in line, Andrew, I think with what you were talking about before. It's role-based. It's not AO 5 to 6 based, it's role based, the roles that make sense, levels that make sense to the organisation. And you can run this process very quickly, comparatively quickly, across those different levels of leadership, so that you're getting to the right level of capability and you're getting to the core capabilities that make sense for the business, and you can then cluster them accordingly to what the business, in this particular area, the business down that left-hand side, were calling out key things of how they wanted to cluster their capabilities to reinforce their approach to the strategy. Now, people might think, okay, well that's a bit fixed. This is a bit fixed as far as a framework goes. How flexible can that be to changes in priority, changes in business priority? Well, it's eminently flexible, because if the business priority changes, that means that the business driver changes, and that then points to particular capabilities within that comprehensive framework that the organisation needs to focus on. Just because there are 10 or 12 competencies, capabilities within a particular profile doesn't mean in every instance you've got to cover all those things. What makes sense from the business perspective? For example, we use this process, I use this process most recently with an organisation to build a framework like this within 6 weeks to 2 months, where we looked at using this sort of framework with the executive leadership team to get their take on what was important, and then several leadership levels down to make sure that we were focusing on the key things. Now, what that gave us was relevance in terms of what the capability framework was pointing out, but even more importantly, probably for its implementation, was a level of engagement that the senior leaders and the executive leaders had with capability frameworks that they didn't have before. There were actually some key people within those levels that were going, we don't like capability frameworks, they don't work. After using this sort of process and enabling that link between this is what the business needs, therefore this is how we need to operate, they actually became the key advocates for the development, for the implementation, for the socialising, and for the piloting of this process across the organisation.
I really like the the first column. It is so action oriented and such a business speak. It's pretty much what you would kind of find in annual reports, I guess.
Yeah, and in terms of that, and that's where the uniqueness comes in, because you're looking at clustering things in the unique ways that make sense for an organisation, whereas some of those capabilities you're going to be seeing across different organisations, but there's different combinations there, and they're linked to different business priorities, different business imperatives.
So Harry, can I ask a question? For example, do whatever it takes, right? So we've got like an individual contributor, we've got like decision making and adaptability, right? Is there a recognition that the culture needs to support that? So if it is kind of a top down and the boss is going to decide everything, it probably doesn't mesh very well with do whatever it takes. So how is there a recognition that just defining capabilities needs to be supported by a fairly major culture change from what I can see from the screen?
Certainly this sort of thing is a major culture change, because what you're looking at doing is not building what it is now, you're looking at building what the organisation needs over the next 2 to 3 years. And inevitably, if there isn't something in the capability framework that people point to and go, actually we're not doing that yet, then you probably need to review what the framework is saying, because this should be the core set of behaviours that everybody is. If 80% of all your people in the organisation were humming along and being proficient at these, then that's likely to have or even 80% of them, that's likely to have a significant impact on the organisation. And it should have that applicability across selection, across development, across performance management, across succession management. There should be that capability across all those things. Otherwise, you're going to get people saying it's not relevant, we're not using it. If you have put this process in place, typically it's for a particular reason. Is it to develop the leadership pipeline? Is it to develop leadership capability where people are now? Is it to cut down on turnover? That unless you build in the skills for the relevant people that are going to support the application of that of that framework, then chances are you're going to get the sorts of responses that people get saying it's not working. I'm mindful of time, Jeevan. How much time have we got left?
Got a couple of minutes. Yep, got a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So, I guess to wrap up, what we're looking at saying is that capability frameworks are a key part of the component. They're in that competency area, but you can get the other detail around critical roles and technical skills in the other aspects of the success profile. And so that's in terms of the build. If I could ask you to go to the next slide, Jeevan. It's then about the sustainability. It's about having when we look at organisations that say we put it in but it didn't work, then there's usually something around the rigour of the plan, the rigour of the implementation, such that the communications didn't happen well. The accountabilities weren't spelled out and weren't supported. The skills that are relevant for the implementation of that framework were actually not put in place. It wasn't aligned so that people could use it across selection, development, performance management, and succession management, and people didn't measure what they set out to achieve. Now that's very easy for me to say, but in terms of the rigour of the planning around its sustainability, that's where you're going to get take-up, that's where you're going to get people saying, this works for me, this is useful, versus, I don't know where that came from, I don't understand how it relates to the business, and unless my executive is saying that we need to do it, unless they're engaged in it, I probably won't be either. I could keep talking, but I'd better be quiet now.
Thanks, Harry. Look, we're almost at the end of the time. I might actually just go around the panel and ask them one thing they would like to improve in the whole area of competency frameworks, either the development or the use. So I didn't warn the panel about this before, so you're under the spotlight. So probably go with Miles. Miles, you there? Sorry, you're muted. Andrea, can we start with you first?
My wish for a perfect world would be a simple process that supervisors feel comfortable using. So it uses their language and it assists them provide good service to their customers, so whoever that may be. So that's my, so getting away from the HR speak that has potentially come in and use straightforward language.
Sure.
Like the stuff that Harry put forward. Yeah.
Thanks. Miles, over to you.
The KISS principle. I think there's a lot of smart people on this call and there's a lot of smart people that work in this space. We've just got to make sure that whatever we do is simple, and to Andrea's point, the language, our measures and our engagement levels are really focused on getting things done.
Thanks, Miles. Harry?
Yep, agree. Simple, pragmatic, easy to use, and everybody who is looking at that can see how it applies to them and how it helps them do as well as they can.
Thank you. And my own desire would be to keep the employee or the learner at the center of whatever you do, so that we don't bombard them with different types of capability frameworks and then assessments from different directions. So I think they're already pretty overloaded. So whatever capability stuff needs to be done, it's smart, integrated, compact, and delivers value. So look, thank you everyone. I think that was a great webinar. We've got a recording in case you want to. The link will be sent through an email. So again, thanks to the panel. I think we had some great presentations and I certainly learned a lot. So thanks Harry, thanks Miles, and thanks Andrea.
Thank you all.
Stephen.
Thanks everyone. So you can disconnect now by just closing the go to webinar meeting window. Thanks.